50 feet above the Bismarck Sea, 240 knots. Major Ed Lana is looking down the muzzles of a Japanese destroyer's anti-aircraft guns, and he can see the faces of the men who are trying to kill him. The airplane he is flying weighs 16 tons. It has 850 caliber machine guns welded into its nose. And 3 months earlier, the best engineers in the United States Army Air Forces stamped a formal report declaring that this exact aircraft cannot fly. They said the center of gravity was wrong. They said the fuselage would tear apart. They said the pilot could not physically hold the controls. The man who designed it never went to engineering school. He drew it in pencil in a hangar in Australia on the back of a supply form. His name was Paul Gunn. And in the next 72 hours, the airplane the engineers said could not exist was going to sink 12 Japanese ships. Paul Irvin Gunn was born in October of 1899 in a small Arkansas town called Quitman. His father was a blacksmith. His mother raised 6 children on a dirt floor. He grew up watching his shaper iron with a hammer, learning that a man could bend metal to his will if he understood the metal better than the metal understood itself. He enlisted in the United States Navy in 1918. He was 18 years old. The war in Europe was almost over, but Paul Gunn was just beginning. The Navy made him an aviation mechanist mate. He learned to take engines apart. He learned to put them back together. He learned that every airplane in the world was held together by rivets, bolts, and men who understood how the pieces fit. In 1923, the Navy offered him a chance to fly. Not as an officer, not with a commission, not with a degree from Annapolis or a diploma from an engineering school. He would fly as an enlisted man, a pilot with grease under his fingernails. They called them enlisted naval aviators. It was the lowest rung of the flying ladder, and Paul Gunn climbed onto it without hesitation. He flew fighters in the Top Hat Squadron. He instructed cadets at Pensacola. He served 21 years, and on the day he retired, in 1939, he was 40 years old, and he held the rank of Chief Petty Officer. Not commander, not captain, not general, chief. A sailor with wings. He married Clara Louise Crosby in the summer of 1921. She was young, and she was patient, and she followed him everywhere the Navy sent him. They had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. He called her Polly. She called him P.I. The children called him Father. In 1939, he moved his family to the Philippines. He had been offered a job. A wealthy businessman in Manila wanted a pilot who could also fix the airplanes when they broke. Paul Gunn was the perfect man. He arrived in Manila with 5 Beechcraft aircraft and a plan. He named the company Philippine Airlines. He flew every route himself. For 2 years, he was happy. Polly and the children lived in a bungalow in Manila. The sun was warm. The work was good. The war in Europe was far away. Paul Gunn was 42 years old, and he had built something with his own hands, and he thought the hardest years of his life were behind him. He was wrong. On the morning of December 8, 1941, the Japanese attacked the Philippines. Bombs fell on Clark Field. Bombs fell on Manila. Bombs fell on the airline that Paul Gunn had spent 2 years building. The United States Army came to him within hours. They needed his Beechcrafts. They needed his pilots. They needed him. He was commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Forces on the spot. No academy, no training, just a signature on a piece of paper and a war. In the 3rd week of December, they told him to fly a group of senior officers south to Australia. The Philippines were falling. General MacArthur needed his staff evacuated. Paul Gunn was the man who knew the routes. He kissed his wife goodbye at the airfield. He handed her a roll of American cash. He told her not to worry. "I'll be back for you," he said. He climbed into his airplane. He took off. He never saw Manila again for 3 years. On January 20th, 1942, the Japanese soldiers came to the house. Polly was inside with the 4 children. They were given 10 minutes to pack. They were taken to the campus of the University of Santo Tomas in the center of Manila. The Japanese had turned the university into a prison camp. 3,000 American, British, and Dutch civilians were locked inside the walls. Polly and the children became 4 of them. The rations were cut, and cut again, and cut again. The children lost weight. Polly lost weight. The oldest son turned 17 inside the wire. The youngest daughter turned 6. They did not know if Paul was alive. Paul did not know if they were alive. The war swallowed everyone. In Australia, Paul Gunn started working. He did not sleep much. He did not talk much. He flew every mission he could get on. And, in August of 1942, he met the man who was about to change everything. Lieutenant General George Kenny arrived in Australia in the first week of August. He was 53 years old. He had thick eyebrows and a hard mouth, and he had just been given command of the 5th Air Force. What he inherited was a disaster. His bombers could not hit Japanese ships. His B-17s dropped bombs from 15,000 feet, and the ships simply steered around them. His B-25 Mitchells were faster, more agile, and equally useless. In the month of July alone, the 3rd Attack Group had lost 11 light bombers trying to attack Japanese convoys from altitude. Kenny needed a new way to kill ships. He asked the men under his command, who understood airplanes best. One name kept coming up, a captain nobody had heard of, a retired Navy mechanic, a man who fixed things nobody else could fix. Paul Gunn. They met at a hangar at Eagle Farm Airfield in Brisbane. Kenny did not shake hands like a general. He asked questions like an engineer. Gunn answered them like a mechanic. Within 20 minutes, they understood each other perfectly. Gunn showed him what he could do. He had already been modifying A-20 Havoc light bombers, replacing the standard nose guns with heavier 50 caliber Brownings. On the 12th of September, 1942, 16 of Gunn's modified A-20s hit the Japanese airfield at Buna in New Guinea. They came in at treetop level. They destroyed 14 aircraft on the ground. They lost none of their own. Kenny had his answer, but the A-20 had limits. Its range was too short to reach the Japanese bases across the Owen Stanley Mountains. Its bomb load was too light to do what Kenny really wanted, to hunt convoys in the open ocean. Gunn needed a bigger airplane. He needed the B-25 Mitchell. In November of 1942, Kenny gave him the order. Convert a B-25 the same way. Bigger guns, more of them. Nose solid. Make it a ship killer. Gunn began work at Eagle Farm in the first week of December. He took a B-25C off the line. He pulled the Bombardier. He pulled the Norden bomb sight. He pulled the glass nose. He welded 4 50 caliber Browning machine guns into the space where the Bombardier used to sit. He added 2 more guns in a package on each side of the fuselage, just below the cockpit windows. 8 barrels of forward-firing steel. There were no engineering calculations. There was no stress analysis. There was no wind tunnel data. There was a 43-year-old retired chief petty officer, a hand-drawn sketch on a piece of scratch paper, and the word of a man who had been taking airplanes apart for 21 years. Kenny did not go through Wright Field. He did not go through North American Aviation. He did not go through any official channel. He simply told Gunn to build it. Gunn stripped the 50 caliber Brownings out of 3 P-40 fighters that had crashed on takeoff and would never fly again. Their pilots were dead. Their guns were not. He carried them across the airfield on his shoulder, one at a time, and he installed them in the nose of the B-25 with a torch and a hammer. and the same hands that had shaped iron in his father's forge 40 years earlier. The ground crew watched him work. They did not laugh at him, but they gave the airplane a nickname anyway. They called it Pappy's Folly. On the morning of the first test flight, the airplane sat on the runway with 4 50 caliber machine guns in its nose, 200 pounds of ammunition in its belly, and a center of gravity that had shifted well forward of where the North American aviation engineers had designed it to be. The test pilot climbed in. He pushed the throttles forward. The B-25 rolled down the runway and lifted off, and immediately tried to kill him. The nose pitched down. The pilot pulled the stick all the way back into his stomach. The nose kept pitching down. He fought the airplane for 8 minutes. He landed with sweat pouring down his face. He climbed out. He looked at Paul Gunn. He did not say a single word. Gunn spent 3 days rebalancing the airplane. He moved the batteries to the tail. He moved the radios to the center. He welded ballast into the rear fuselage. He shifted every piece of equipment he could find further aft. Then he told the pilot to try again. The second test flight lasted 40 minutes. When the pilot landed, he climbed out, and he told Paul Gunn that the airplane flew like an angry bull. But it flew. Kenny was on the tarmac when the second flight ended. He watched the pilot climb down. He watched Gunn wipe grease off his hands with a rag. Then he told Gunn to convert every B-25 they could get their hands on. The order went out that afternoon. The 81st Air Depot Group in Townsville would work 18-hour shifts, whatever it takes. By the end of December 1942, one B-25 gunship existed in the world. By late February 1943, there would be 30. And back in Ohio, in a heated office at Wright Field, the engineers of the United States Army Air Forces Engineering Division were about to receive a copy of Paul Gunn's sketch. They were not going to like what they saw. The design specifications arrived at Wright Field in the first week of January 1943. They had traveled 12,000 miles, from a hangar in Brisbane to a supply plane, to a courier in San Francisco, to a mailroom in Dayton, Ohio. The engineers who received them were the best engineers in the United States Army Air Forces. They had graduated from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They had graduated from Caltech. They had graduated from Purdue. They had slight rules on their desks and stress calculation charts on their walls. They understood aerodynamics the way a priest understands scripture. They looked at the design. They looked at each other. Then they started to work. For 3 days, they analyzed Paul Gunn's modifications. They calculated the shift in the center of gravity. They calculated the muzzle blast pressure of 850 caliber machine guns firing simultaneously. They calculated the vibration frequency of the fuselage skin around the cheek gun packages. They calculated the load stress on the wing roots when the aircraft pulled out of a low-altitude bombing run at 240 knots. Every calculation gave them the same answer. The airplane could not fly. The center of gravity was wrong. The muzzle blast would shatter the cockpit windscreen. The fuselage skin would tear off under sustained firing. The wing roots would fail during the pullout. The bomb release mechanism was not designed for skip bombing from 50 feet. The pilot could not physically hold the aircraft level at that altitude with that much weight forward of the center line. The report was drafted by senior engineers. It was reviewed by section chiefs. It was signed and stamped with the seal of the United States Army Air Forces Engineering Division. The verdict was official. The verdict was final. Recommend immediate grounding of all modified B-25 aircraft in the Southwest Pacific area. The report was flown to Washington. It was placed on the desk of General Henry Harley Arnold, commanding general of the United States Army Air Forces. It waited. While it waited, the war in New Guinea was about to detonate. Back in Brisbane, Paul Gunn did not know about the Wright Field report. He was too busy trying to solve a problem that had almost killed his gunship. The problem was the guns. When Gunn's B-25 fired all 4 nose-mounted 50 caliber machine guns at the same time, something extraordinary happened. The pressure wave from the muzzles rolled backward across the surface of the aircraft. It hit the cockpit windshield. It hit the aluminum skin around the nose. It hit the rivets that held the airframe together. The rivets started to loosen. The windshield cracked. The aluminum skin, less than 1/8 of an inch thick, buckled inward like the surface of a drum. If the problem was not solved, the airplane would tear itself apart the first time it fired all its guns in combat. Gunn worked on it for a week. Nothing worked. He was standing under the wing of a B-25 at Eagle Farm one afternoon, staring at the problem when a man he had never met walked up behind him and introduced himself. The man's name was Jack Fox. He was a civilian. He was in his mid-30s. He wore a wrinkled suit and no tie, and he was sweating through his shirt in the Australian heat. He was a technical representative for North American Aviation, the company that manufactured the B-25 Mitchell. He had been sent from California on an official assignment. The assignment was to shut down Paul Gunn's project. North American Aviation had received reports from the 5th Air Force. They had learned that unauthorized modifications were being performed on their aircraft in the field. This was a warranty problem. This was a liability problem. The company had sent Jack Fox to Australia to investigate, document, and put an end to it. Fox had planned to stay for 1 week. He stayed for 6 months. He watched Paul Gunn work. He watched Gunn weld gun mounts by hand. He watched Gunn draw schematics on cocktail napkins in the officers' mess. He watched Gunn move batteries around inside the fuselage with a hand truck and a crowbar. He watched Gunn take a hammer to a piece of aluminum and shape it into a blast tube. And Jack Fox, the engineer who had been sent to shut Paul Gunn down, took off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves and got to work beside him. Fox understood things Gunn did not. Fox knew the internal wiring diagrams of the B-25. Fox knew the exact tensile strength of every rivet North American Aviation used. Fox knew the compression ratios of the Wright R2600 engines. Fox knew where every fuel line ran, where every hydraulic line ran, where every electrical conduit ran. Gunn understood things Fox did not. Gunn knew how a gun barrel behaved when it got hot. Gunn knew what a 500-pound bomb did when it hit the water at 300 miles an hour. Gunn knew how a pilot's hands moved when the airplane was trying to kill him. Together, they solved the muzzle blast problem. They welded blast tubes onto the ends of the machine guns. The tubes carried the pressure wave forward, away from the aircraft, before it could hit the windshield or the fuselage skin. They reinforced the aluminum around the cheek gun mounts with a second layer of heavier gauge metal. They installed structural bracing between the fuselage and the engine nacelles to prevent the recoil forces from cracking the wing roots. The modifications worked. The airplane could now fire all 8 forward-facing machine guns at the same time without shaking itself apart. By the middle of February 1943, 30 B-25 gunships had been converted at Townsville. They were assigned to the 90th Bomb Squadron, the Pair O' Dice, part of the 3rd Attack Group. Their commander was a 29-year-old major from Ohio named Edward Larner. Larner was a barrel-chested, cigar-chewing, hard-drinking pilot who wore his service cap crushed and pushed back on his head like a fighter jock. He had been a classmate of Donald Hall, the commander of the 89th Bomb Squadron. He had made his reputation on aggression. Kenny had personally approved his promotion to squadron command. Lana was told to learn a new technique. The technique was called skip bombing. The idea had been championed by General Kenny himself, dating back to his years at the Air Corps Tactical School. Drop a bomb from a low-flying aircraft. Let it skip across the surface of the water like a stone. Watch it slam into the side of a ship below the waterline. The man who developed the technique in combat was Major William Benn of the 43rd Bomb Group. Ben had spent the last months of 1942 working out the mathematics of it. On the 18th of January, 1943, Ben's B-17 disappeared on a mission over New Guinea. He was 32 years old. The man who took over the technique was Captain Ken McCullough. McCullough was brilliant. McCullough was aggressive. McCullough was, by every account, the best low-altitude bomber pilot in the 5th Air Force. McCullough was going to die too. On the 12th of April, 1943, his B-17 would crash on takeoff at Port Moresby. He was 28. Two of the men who developed skip bombing would be dead within 4 months of each other. The technique they had bled to build was going to be proven in combat by other men flying other airplanes. One of those men was Ed Lana. He trained his squadron for 4 weeks. They practiced by skip bombing the wreck of a British freighter that had run aground on a reef outside Port Moresby Harbour before the war. They dropped inert practice bombs from 50 feet. They watched them skip. They watched them hit. They corrected. They tried again. By the 28th of February, 1943, the 90th Bomb Squadron was ready. That same night, 16 Japanese ships slipped their moorings in the harbour at Rabaul on the island of New Britain and turned their bows west toward New Guinea. 8 troop transports, 8 destroyers. Approximately 6,900 Japanese soldiers of the 51st Infantry Division under Lieutenant General Hidemitsu Nakano. Their objective was Lae, a small coastal town on the north shore of New Guinea. Their mission was to reinforce the Japanese army before General MacArthur could push the Allied line forward. The convoy was commanded by Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura aboard the destroyer Shirayuki. Kimura was a careful man. He had studied the weather forecasts. The monsoon season was at its peak. The Bismarck Sea would be covered in low clouds and heavy rain for the next 4 days. Kimura believed the weather would hide his convoy. He was right about the weather. He was wrong about the bombers. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on the 1st of March 1943, an American B-24 Liberator on patrol out of Port Moresby broke through a gap in the clouds. The pilot looked down. He saw the entire convoy spread out below him. He radioed the sighting. He turned for home. At 5th Air Force Headquarters, General Kenny received the report that afternoon. He looked at the map. He looked at the position of the convoy. He looked at the projected course toward Lae. He calculated the distance and the speed and the time. He had 72 hours. He called for Major Ed Lana. The next morning, the 2nd of March, B-17 Flying Fortresses attacked the convoy from 15,000 feet through breaks in the cloud cover. They flew multiple sorties throughout the day. They hit one ship. The Kyokusei Maru, a Japanese troop transport, took a direct hit and sank. She carried more than 1,000 soldiers. Roughly half of them were rescued by the destroyers. The rest drowned, but 15 ships were still moving toward Lae. And in the 5th Air Headquarters at Port Moresby, General Kenny looked at the results of the high-altitude bombing attack. This was exactly what Wright Field said was the correct way to bomb ships. This was exactly what the engineers at Ohio had approved. This was exactly what the doctrine required. And this was exactly what was going to lose the war in New Guinea. So Kenny turned to his staff. He gave the order, "Send Lana in at first light." At sunrise on the 3rd of March 1943, the sky over Cape Ward Hunt began to fill with airplanes. Well over 100 aircraft rose from the airfields around Port Moresby. B-17s to draw the anti-aircraft fire high. B-25s and A-20s to attack low. Australian bow fighters from Squadron 30 of the Royal Australian Air Force to sweep the decks of the transports with their 4 20mm cannons. P-38 Lightnings for top cover to keep the Japanese Zeros off the bombers. At the front of the formation, at the head of 12 B-25 gunships, flew Major Ed Lana in an aircraft his ground crew had named the Chatterbox. He came in from the southeast. He dropped to 50 feet. He pushed his throttles forward until his airspeed indicator read 240 knots. The water beneath his aircraft was so close he could see the whitecaps. Ahead of him, spread across the ocean like a wounded animal, was the Japanese convoy. And in the cockpit of a B-25 that the United States Army Air Forces Engineering Division had officially declared could not fly, Ed Lana opened his bomb bay doors, tightened his grip on the control yoke, and put his thumb on the firing button of 850 caliber machine guns. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was about to begin. The first ship Ed Lana attacked was a troop transport, the Teo Maru, a 6,000-ton vessel carrying more than 1,000 Japanese soldiers of the 51st Infantry Division. Her captain had been at sea for over 2 days. He had not slept. He saw the bowfighters coming first. He saw them raking his deck with 20mm cannon fire. He saw his anti-aircraft gunners falling before they could bring their weapons around. Then he saw the B-25s. Lana leveled his aircraft at 50 feet above the water. His airspeed was 240 knots. His nose was pointed directly at the bridge of the transport. He waited until the range dropped to 800 yards. Then he opened fire. 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns firing simultaneously produce a sound that is not comparable to any other sound in the world. It is not the crack of a rifle. It is not the boom of a cannon. It is a continuous shriek of tearing metal, like a chainsaw ripping through a sheet of steel at close range. Together, they threw over 100 rounds per second at the target. The recoil vibrated the entire airframe like a struck bell. The bullets walked across the water between the B-25 and the Teo Maru in less than 1 second. Then they hit the ship. They hit the bridge. They hit the anti-aircraft platforms. They hit the men standing on the deck. They hit the ammunition ready racks. They hit the fuel drums lashed to the cargo hatches. The men who might have coordinated the ship's defense were all dead before the range closed to 400 yards. At 100 yards, Lana released 2 500-pound bombs. The bombs left the belly of the B-25. They struck the surface of the ocean. They skipped. They kept coming. Then they slammed into the hull of the Teo Maru below the waterline. The first bomb detonated inside the forward cargo hold, where hundreds of soldiers were sheltering from the strafing run. The second bomb detonated deeper in the ship and blew a hole in the boilers. Steam and fire and pulverized steel erupted from the ship's midsection. Her keel gave way. Her stern began to sink. The Teo Maru was gone in minutes. Behind Lana, the other 11 B-25s of the 9th Bomb Squadron picked their targets and attacked. Captain John Hennebury, flying on Lana's wing, watched the lead aircraft make its solo run and marveled that a bomber could do this. Every pilot in the formation found a target. Every pilot fired his guns. Every pilot dropped his bombs. Lana keyed his radio. He shouted at his lieutenants to stop following him. "Damn it! Get the hell off my wing and get your own boat." 12 B-25 gunships dropped 37 500-pound bombs in the space of minutes. 17 of them hit their targets. 46% accuracy. The B-17s the day before, dropping from 15,000 feet, had achieved less than 1%. The A-20 Havocs of the 89th Bomb Squadron came in behind the B-25s. They carried 20 more bombs. They scored 11 direct hits. The Australian Beaufighters swept the decks of the destroyers. The P-38 Lightnings dueled the Japanese Zeros overhead. By late morning on the 3rd of March, 1943, the Japanese convoy was scattered across 40 square miles of ocean. Multiple transports were sinking or burning. The destroyer Shirayuki, the flagship, had taken a direct bomb hit in her aft magazine. Admiral Kimura was transferred to the destroyer Shikinami. 2 more destroyers, the Arashio and the Tokitsukaze, were burning. The B-25s returned to Port Moresby to rearm and refuel. They came back that afternoon with fresh bombs and full ammunition belts. The Japanese fighter cover from Lae had landed to refuel and was caught on the ground. There was no air opposition. The second wave finished what the first wave had started. By the evening of the 3rd of March, every transport in the convoy was destroyed. By the morning of the 4th, 3 of the destroyers had been sunk. Later, American PT boats under Lieutenant Commander Barry Atkins swept through the wreckage. The last surviving cripple, the destroyer Asashio, went down with her. 12 ships, 72 hours, roughly 2,900 Japanese soldiers dead. Fewer than 1,000 of the nearly 7,000 men who had left Rabaul ever reached New Guinea. And there is a part of this story that must be told, and it must be told honestly, because the men who lived through it never forgave themselves for what they had to do. On the 4th and 5th of March, Allied aircraft returned to the battle site. The ocean was covered in wreckage and men. Japanese soldiers were floating on life rafts. Japanese sailors were clinging to pieces of broken hulls. Japanese survivors were being picked up by their own destroyers and submarines. The order came from 5th Air Force headquarters: strafe the survivors. The reasoning was cold, and it was clear. Every Japanese soldier who reached Lae would be handed a rifle. Every Japanese soldier who reached Lae would be sent to the front. Every Japanese soldier who reached Lae would kill Allied troops on the ground. The men in the water had to be prevented from reaching the fight. Not every pilot obeyed. Many did. The Beaufighters and the B-25s and the A-20s made low passes over the life rafts. The men in the rafts had no defense. The gunners on the aircraft did what they had been ordered to do. The Australian War Memorial records the truth in the plainest words. It was a horrible task, and one that haunted several of the air crews for years to come. There were pilots in that battle who never spoke about the 4th and 5th of March for the rest of their lives. There were tail gunners who wept in their cockpits and were still weeping when they landed. There were men who prayed in the sky. This was the war. This was the price. This is what the record shows. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was over. General Douglas MacArthur called it one of the most complete and annihilating combats of all time. The Imperial Japanese Navy would never again attempt to reinforce New Guinea by convoy. The war in the Southwest Pacific had turned in 72 hours. The news reached Washington within days. A telegram from George Kenney landed on the desk of General Henry Arnold. Commerce destroyer modifications approved for production. Request immediate factory integration of forward gun package into all B-25 production aircraft. Arnold read the telegram twice. Then he called J.H. Kindleberger, the president of North American Aviation. He told Kindleberger that his engineers were about to have a visitor. He told Kindleberger that the visitor did not have an engineering degree. He told Kindleberger that the visitor was going to teach them how to build the airplane they had spent 5 years believing they already knew how to build. Paul Gunn arrived at the North American Aviation plant in Long Beach, California, in the spring of 1943. He was 43 years old. He was wearing a wrinkled uniform. He had grease under his fingernails. The plant covered 140 acres. 20,000 workers moved through the assembly lines on 3 shifts. Every 4 hours, another B-25 rolled out of the factory doors and onto the tarmac. The engineers who met him had graduated from the finest universities in America. They wore ties. They carried slide rules. They spoke in the vocabulary of aeronautical engineering. They asked Paul Gunn for his stress calculations. Gunn said he did not have any. They asked him for his wind tunnel data. Gunn said he had tested the airplane by flying it. They asked him for his center of gravity analysis. Gunn walked over to a B-25 fuselage in the engineering bay. He pointed at the aft compartment. He said he had moved the batteries there. He pointed at the middle compartment. He said he had moved the radio there. He said the airplane balanced now. He said that was the whole calculation. For weeks, the engineers at North American Aviation reverse-engineered a hand-drawn sketch made by a retired chief petty officer. They gave it stress numbers. They gave it tolerance specifications. They gave it official technical drawings and blueprints and revision codes. They did not change the design. They only wrote it down. The first factory-built B-25G rolled off the assembly line at Long Beach on the 10th of May, 1943. It had 250 caliber machine guns in the nose. It had a 75mm M4 cannon in the forward fuselage, firing the same 75mm shells used by the M3 tank gun. 400 B-25Gs were built. The 75mm cannon was eventually removed from 5th Air Force strafers. The pilot said it was too slow. They wanted more machine guns instead. Then came the B-25H, 14 forward-firing guns and a lighter, faster-firing 75mm cannon. Then came the B-25J, which entered service in late 1943. Roughly 4,000 were built. Many of them were configured with the solid strafer nose that Paul Gunn had designed by hand in a hangar outside Brisbane. Several thousand B-25 strafer variants were built in total. They sank hundreds of Japanese ships in the Pacific. They destroyed thousands of Japanese aircraft on the ground. They became the most heavily armed medium bomber ever placed into mass production. And back in New Guinea, on the 30th of April, 1943, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Major Ed Larner returned from a routine mission and prepared to land at WWII airfield. He made his usual approach. He came in low over the runway. He pulled up sharply into his signature chandelle, a hard climbing turn that had become his trademark. Something in the airframe failed. The aircraft went down. Larner was killed. His entire crew was killed with him. He was 29 years old. He had commanded the 90th Bomb Squadron for 4 months. He had led the attack that changed the war in the Pacific, and he did not live to see North American Aviation produce a single factory-built version of the airplane he had flown into the Bismarck Sea. Captain John Hennebrey took command of the 90th Bomb Squadron. Hennebrey would fly Paul Gunn's B-25 gunships until the end of the war. Jack Fox returned to North American Aviation after the war. He continued as a technical representative for the company in the Pacific. He had spent 6 months in Australia, helping a retired Navy mechanic prove his own employer wrong. He never regretted it. Paul Gunn continued to serve. On the 27th of November 1944, at Tacloban Airfield on the island of Leyte in the Philippines, A Japanese air raid dropped a white phosphorus bomb near his position. A fragment struck him in the shoulder. It shattered the joint. It ended his combat flying career. He was evacuated. His war was over. On the 3rd of February, 1945, elements of the 1st Cavalry Division of the United States Army fought their way into Manila. They liberated the Santo Tomas internment camp. Paul Gunn was not with them. He was still recovering from his wound, but he was in the air within days. On direct orders from General MacArthur, Colonel Dave Hutchinson of the 308th Bombardment Wing found the Gunn family inside the camp. Clara Louise Gunn was skin and bone. His youngest daughter had shrunk to a child's shadow. His son had malaria. They were all alive. Paul Gunn flew to Manila against his doctor's orders. He walked into the makeshift hospital at Santo Tomas. His hair had gone completely white in 3 years. His wife did not recognize him for a moment. Then he said her name. They had not seen each other for 38 months. He retired from the army on the 30th of June, 1948, as a full colonel with a medical disability from his wound at Tacloban. He held the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and multiple Purple Hearts. The Distinguished Service Cross was recommended for him. It was not approved. North American Aviation hired him as a consulting engineer after the war. The company that had watched its own field representative disappear into the Australian outback to help a chief petty officer prove the engineering division wrong, now paid Paul Gunn a salary to advise them on their next generation of bombers. He worked on gun-mounting systems. He consulted on forward-firing armament packages. He gave most of the money to veterans organizations. He rebuilt Philippine Airlines. He started with war surplus C-47 transports. By the mid-1950s, the airline he had founded before the war was flying to San Francisco. On the 11th of October, 1957, he was aboard a chartered Beechcraft Model 18 flying north from Manila. The weather forecast showed scattered thunderstorms over the Cordillera Mountains. Nothing severe. The storm cell that took him was worse than the forecast had predicted. His aircraft flew into it. The winds drove him into a ridge in the mountains. Paul Irvin Gunn was killed instantly, along with everyone else on board. He was 57 years old. His 58th birthday was 1 week away. The Philippine government gave him a state funeral. American veterans came. Philippine Airlines employees came. Former prisoners from Santo Tomas came, men and women who had never forgotten the family that had shared their captivity. The original hand-drawn sketch is preserved at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. The paper is yellowed. The measurements are written in pencil. There are no stress calculations. There are no engineering symbols. There is only a rough drawing of machine guns bolted into the nose of a twin-engine bomber, sketched by a man who had never taken a single engineering course in his life. The B-25 gunship changed how the world thought about attack aircraft. The A-1 Skyraider that flew in Korea was descended from it. The AC-47 Spooky and the AC-130 gunship that flew over Vietnam were descended from it. The A-10 Thunderbolt that still flies today is descended from it. Every modern attack aircraft with a forward-firing gun package carries a piece of what Paul Gunn built in that hangar in Brisbane. The engineers at Wright Field spent 3 days analyzing his design. They had graduate degrees, they had slide rules, they had the full resources of the United States Army Air Forces. They said the airplane could not fly. Paul Gunn had a pencil, a piece of scratch paper, and 21 years of taking things apart. 12 Japanese ships in 72 hours in the Bismarck Sea proved which of them was right. If this story mattered to you, hit the like button. It tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. If someone in your family served, tell us about them. The men who flew these aircraft, the men who built them, the men who dreamed them up in hangars at the edge of the war, they deserve to be remembered. You are helping us remember them. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Paul Gunn does not disappear into silence.